Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name is Oscar.
My name's George. And in this episode, we went around quite a few little twists and turns and got a little bit sidetracked at one point, but it was all good stuff, so it doesn't really matter. I think actually your summing up at the end, I really enjoyed that. I thought that really kind of brought it together. And yeah, so that was actually the highlight for me.
Oh, that's kind. That was my favorite bit too. I've been doing a lot of work in the area of the heart recently, so it was great to be able to chat about that and to go into this area. It just feels very alive at the moment. So it was really exciting to actually go into it. And yeah, I think there's all sorts in here. There's all sorts of goodies. So yeah, give it a listen. Let us know what you think. And yeah, enjoy.
Let's get into the episode.
The quote for this week is by a spiritual teacher called Jack Kornfield from a book of his called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. Jack Kornfield's super well-respected Buddhist teacher, and he's, very readable. His books, like very kind of profound, very readable and funny. And I've read through a few of them. There's a lot of quotable stuff, and this is I think this quote's a little bit clunky. I did pull it out, but I just found it kind of covered a really nice area. So I'll just read it out. Without attention on our hearts, we become like the generation of parents who followed popular experts in refusing to feed or pick up crying children, even though every wise instinct and cellular impulse in their body called for them to hold and comfort their child in pain. I'm going to translate this, because it's quite a long one, into my sense of it, which is simply that our hearts are calling us to be held, to be recognized, but we often neglect this calling. And there are lots of reasons why we might choose to be alienated from our own heart. So I guess that's what I'm kind of keen to explore, is like, what are the benefits of being in touch with one's heart? Like, what does that mean? And also, like, why is it, I'm quite intrigued, like, why is it that it's so difficult, or why is it that we end up being so separate? So that's my little initial introduction. I don't know if you want to maybe come in there and just say what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I noticed with this quote is kind of the dichotomy really between the emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence. And it's something we've talked about a little bit before, how, there is a lot of emphasis on kind of a logical way of thinking. And that really has been put forward as the epitome of rightness. To be thinking in a logical frame of mind is always superior to being emotional. Like it's definitely kind of denigrated the idea of being emotional like that. And I think there's something that I've realized myself, and I think that is being more realized at large in society now. I think anyway, that might just be a reflection of myself and how I'm thinking of it. But that, there is a lot of wisdom in that emotional intelligence, and it's something that I've tried to become more aware of, and to actually give credence to those emotions and those feelings, and then to kind of balance that with logic, and to kind of to use those things together. That's how they can be the strongest, is when you can combine the logic and the emotion together. So I think it's a really interesting balance between those two things.
When you say emotion, would sort of intuition come in there as well?
Yeah, no, I think of that as intuition. Like, if you say, for example, if you meet someone and you get a kind of gut feeling about that person, it might be a feeling of distrust, perhaps. You might meet someone and just feel like, there's something off about this person. And It's actually in the book by Robert Greene, The Laws of Human Nature. He talks about this, how important it can be actually to pay attention to those initial emotional reactions. There can be a lot of intelligence, a lot of things that you pick up in that. And what happens when you first meet someone, you might get those feelings, but because the other person is kind of ticking all the boxes that we check in society to be a good person, like they're being polite and they're doing all these things that are reasonable and they haven't done anything bad, then what happens is we go, okay, well, I've got a weird feeling about them straight away, but they seem to be a good person. They're doing all these things right. And once you've started to see that person and kind of clear them as, a good person or a kind person or whatever, just based on their actions from this very small data set you have, then once you've kind of cleared someone like that, it will cloud your judgment, because you start to just see them with your logical mind, really. You start to see them as like, yep, they've been polite, they've been kind, they must be a good person. And you're then going to come blind to those first gut feelings you had about that person. So it is important to pay attention to those things that you have, when you first meet someone or when you first think about a subject. Those things are really important to pay attention to. It doesn't mean that you can't be completely wrong about someone. You might have the wrong gut feeling, but it's really important to pay attention to it and not just completely discount that.
I guess it would lead to, even if you do rationalize it, and just as in you go with the logical mind, you say, yep, well, I may not feel comfortable with this person, but this and this means that, it is fine. There's still this interesting thing, which I think goes wider than just initial judgments, but of generally a sense, if we're talking about the heart, or maybe the heart and the emotional, your emotional sense, as being, interchangeable, but like the fact that your logical mind and your heart are in conflict, they're actually sort of having a bit of a battle. And I think everyone knows that experience of when heart and mind is out of sync, because it is like it's like feels maybe like there's clarity in thought, but your body is tense and you can't really you can't quite figure out why, because you're not really respecting that your body has anything to say. It's more like, oh, there's something wrong with this vehicle, I'm like driving the car and there's something wrong under the bonnet and I don't know what it is. And it's just like, so it's not the best example there, but I think that is a very common experience for me anyway, of having a body and mind being out of alignment. And I'm so used to just picking things apart rationally and not really respecting what my emotions have to say, that it just ends up being very strange, like a kind of clear mind and very like tense body, which obviously something's not quite right there. There's a lot of signals going off and you're not quite sure what they are. Yeah. Something that you said initially, I guess, is maybe this area of that we culturally generally go with the logical, basically we go with the head over the heart. And that was something I was thinking about a lot too, and one of the things that came to mind in that was just that we have lived and do still live in quite a patriarchal society, and there's definitely a lot more of an association with being, the head, like with the male, it's like it's being connected to your heart and your feelings as a man. There's a lot of confusion and difficulty around that, like, which is, I just think that's quite an interesting thing to explore. So if we assume that, our society now and definitely in the past has been generally male dominated, and that like being very kind of rational and hard as well, quite often, like a bit shut off from one's feelings, is quite a kind of masculine, trait that can come up, then it's quite, I was really interested in exploring why that might be, you know, like why is it that's the case? And just to kind of clarify what that experience is like as a guy, I guess I'm sure everyone can relate, but you know, I've only got my own experience to go off. You know, it's that there's a frostiness or closedness to the sense of the heart and the sense of the emotional. So one example that I have is at secondary school, then, you know, I might be in a situation where I feel threatened. You know, I might have got bullied, or, you know, I feel socially anxious or whatever. And my sense was definitely of shutting down, you know, of there's vulnerability and there's a lot going on in my heart and there's a lot of pain, you know, and things that really want to be experienced and processed fully. But out of a sense of safety, there's this shutting down of that feeling, a kind of a closing off to that because it's too difficult, you know. And that's I think there's kind of a few points in there, but I think it's to do with the emotions and the heart. They're feeling centers, and feelings can be irrational. They can't, you can't quite figure out what's going on, and therefore if you can't quite figure out what's going on with them, then they can't be controlled. You can't like regulate your feelings necessarily that easily, you know. It's quite mysterious often, and so that would equal feelings showing vulnerability. And that's the key word, is like, I think that's got a real connection with this kind of maybe more the male side of things, of just like, we can't show vulnerability, we can't show weakness, and feelings are too mysterious to us and are too strong, and therefore it's safer to numb them or shut them down. And there's something in that, I think.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense how, you know, if you are having problems with those feelings and finding it really tricky to deal with kind of wayward emotions that just arise in you and you're not really quite sure what's going on and it doesn't really make sense, then, you know, I can see how it makes sense too. And I think I probably have myself just tried to tone everything down, like turn the volume down on all of that emotion and just give it less importance. And I think that through doing that, whoever you are, like your life will be poorer for it. And that it's, you know, it is a shame that is something that a lot of people feel like, you know, they need to do to reject that emotional part of them, or, you know, that, you know, you should just be, you know, cool, hard-headed and rational all the time, and that's always the best thing to do. I think that within each person, it's important to embody and to understand both those parts of you. And also, though, it's important to remember that some people are going to embody more of one side than the other. Some people are going to have much higher emotional intelligence, and just that's going to be a bigger part of the value that they provide to other people and just how they experience the world. And there's going to be some people who don't feel emotions as strongly as other people, and they are not as in touch with them, and, you know, they really thrive on just like really logical thinking of, you know, all these complex structures and how they have all different interdependencies and just breaking everything down in a completely logical, dispassionate way. And both those sorts of people can work well together because they can help balance out each other. So it's not just that you want to have within yourself, be in touch with both of these. It's, you know, you don't have to be 50-50 on it. Like, it's just good to understand both aspects of your own intelligence, and that it's actually great to do this through friends or through books, or so you can, you know, experience people who experience the world in a more emotional way, or really break things down logically all the time. And that is going to help you have a more enjoyable life, and that it's going to make you understand the world better. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize it in other people, and to even seek out and try to understand people who see things quite differently, because wherever you fall, wherever your tendencies are, there's a lot of intelligence and wisdom on the opposite side of the spectrum that you can gain.
I would agree with that we have tendencies either way, and you know, we might feel more naturally emotionally intelligent, or you know, the other way, like we're more kind of rational and thought based. And however, I think that just like there's infinite potential for learning, say you're on the more rational end and you're really into like history, the potential for growing your knowledge and exploring further and reading more and yeah, like growing in that area is sort of infinite in a way. You can just keep on throughout your entire life getting into more and more depth into that, and that's possible on both sides, you know. So like that's definitely possible with emotional intelligence too, and exploring feeling and intuition and having a felt sense of things. I mean, for me personally, like I'm very drawn, even though I'd say that I'm more kind of on the thought-based side, you know, I'm very drawn to, well, it's a life's work, but really delving into the emotional side of things. You know, maybe because it's not something that I perceive as a strength of mine, you know, naturally. So, and I think there's, yeah, it's like I can spend my entire life investigating that. So I guess it's like we've talked about before, you know, of both recognizing your tendencies and being at ease with them, and at the same time not allowing yourself to get fixed by those tendencies, you know, not allowing yourself to get stuck in them. Because if you just label yourself as, yeah, I'm quite a rational person, that's just me, you know, it's like it's failing to recognize that you have the potential to, you know, grow old and at the end of your life be a very emotionally intelligent person, and in fact maybe even identify yourself in a completely different way as to your own tendencies, you know. And so yeah, there's something in that for sure. I mean, for me, something that I'm doing at the moment, which I may have mentioned in previous episodes, I'm not sure, but is that I've got a contract with my friend Tom, and I have to do this particular meditation practice called the 𝗙𝗙𝗿𝗿 every day for a year, and I'm on a month and a bit now, and I have to do it at least 20 minutes a day. The 𝗙𝗙𝗿𝗿 is a practice about emotional intelligence and empathy. That is a training in that. That's what it's about. And essentially, I mean, 𝗙𝗙𝗿𝗿 means the cultivation of loving kindness. It's a Buddhist practice, and it basically uses imagination to empathize with people, and also to sit with your own heart. Like the first stage, there's 5 stages of the meditation, and the first stage is you are bringing compassion and kindness to yourself, and that process is very enriching in this area. You know, it's like I'm becoming familiar with my own emotional landscape and my own heart, which is very deep work. It's like it's kind of infinitely deep in a way, like how much you can delve into that. But it really feels like I'm creating a new relationship with this side of myself, basically, like because it's not a tendency of mine. So yeah, that's something I'm doing at the moment. It's very, very rewarding, actually. Yeah.
No, I definitely think that you can get a lot out of that, and that everyone is going to benefit from exploring, you know, the other side of themselves that might not come as naturally. Really, what I mean in kind of some people specializing is I think of things like, say, for example, an accountant, or something where it's within your career, for you to really be the best you can be in the service you're providing or whatever. It is really about you honing that logical part of you and really becoming an expert and delving even deeper to become like world class in that very specific application of logic. And the same way, and without in the outside of that, in your own time, then yeah, I'm sure people will benefit from exploring, say that person exploring the emotional side of themselves and what it is they want to do and how they want to be, and just getting in touch with that. And the same way, if you were someone who worked in, say, a care industry, so you work at a hospice, for example, like that is someone where that emotional intelligence and that connection is so important and so valuable. And to really be an excellent person in that area, it's beneficial for you to go deeper and deeper into that emotional intelligence. But yeah, I think there are areas like that when it's a career thing, something to do with your purpose in life, where you really do want to be like, let me just like become even better at this thing that I'm already naturally more inclined to. The same way with any skill, really.
I guess with this quote, assuming that it's bringing to attention that there is this tendency to not bring attention to our hearts, that seems to be, well, it's making comparison here with something that is culturally, so the example given was that there was a period when parents were told to not pick up their children when their children were crying, to not condition them to be weak, and not condition them to need to cry to get what they need. And in a way that is a very rational conclusion. If you didn't have any emotional sense or any emotional intuition, it would be quite a clear connecting the dots thing. Like, you don't want to condition your child to be like that. But on the emotional side, it doesn't feel right. It feels really wrong to do that. So I guess with that in mind, that, there's maybe a comment being made about that we culturally are conditioned to not be connected with our hearts. I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts about, like why that might be, or maybe your own experience of that, or...
Well, I think part of it is that there are times where, that emotional intelligence or your instincts will be wrong. And I guess that's something that has been discovered more, maybe within the last 100 years or so, people noticing people having instincts that are incorrect or unhelpful. The same way, say, if you're about to give a presentation in front of a lot of people, it would make sense for you to just walk up, be completely confident, and deliver whatever you need to deliver. That would be best for you, and that would be best for the people there. But because we have ingrained in us so deeply these ideas about status of, if you feel like you're the highest status person in this environment, and you feel completely comfortable to take up the time of these people in front of you, then it will be easy to deliver what you need to deliver. It will kind of just, come out. As long as you know the content you're talking about, you'll be able to be just as sharp as you are in any other area of your life. But often people will feel like they don't have the status that they need to be able to conduct themselves in that way. And you might say that some of those ideas about status are socially programmed, but a lot of that is just how hierarchy just arises within, most mammals and like animals that live in groups. Those things naturally arise where, the people who feel like they have a higher status are more able to do things, and it does change how they behave. So there's kind of quite a clear example of how you can have this deep feeling that you need to run away from the stage, or that you are going to be physically attacked, that you shouldn't be taking up these people's time, that someone else should be here. All of these feelings are very real. That really is your heart speaking. It really is putting you into a fight or flight state. It's not something different, at least how I see it. It really is your intuition, a very deep intuition. But in that context, it's not helpful. It's not helpful for you or the people who you're talking to, because they want you to be able to deliver whatever information as as clearly and as confidently as you need to. So I think it's because there are clear examples where you should go with logic and your emotion is actually kind of fucking you up. So I think that the fact there are scenarios like that can breed a distrust for that emotion, because sometimes it isn't helpful and it's wrong, and it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just think we should always go logic over emotion. And I think that's I at least just thinking about it now feel that could be one of the reasons why this emphasis on logic has been put over your intuition and your emotional intelligence. At least that's my intuition about it.
Yeah, that makes sense with thinking of why that distrust might be there. And again, from situations like that, or actual dangerous situations in which it's important that you fight, but your body, your heart is telling you to run away or to do nothing, or whatever. Over time, that it would be easy to see why the rational mind would start to just say, this is a useless tool, this isn't doing its job properly, basically. And of course there's equivalents going the other way all over the place. You can see in conspiratorial thinking or whatever where the rational mind is being used to come up with theories about things that are just totally off the mark. It's just all this brain power, and it's just completely wrong. So no, it's really interesting thinking of it from that perspective. I think obviously there's like a number of different factors. One of the things that I was thinking about on a more culturally conditioned level, because I can definitely imagine, or I'm almost sure that there will be different cultures that will have a different attitude towards emotions. We may have lived in societies in which it was much more balanced. There was much more emotional intelligence that was seen as like quite a positive thing, and it was seen as an aspect of wisdom, which it is. So I was just thinking about kind of cultural conditioning, like why it might be in our culture that it might be this way, that we have this distrust. And one of the aspects I think is around war and conditioned trauma over generations and generations in terms of war and fighting and killing people, because you can't really be in touch with your heart when you're killing people. It's just not effective. You don't want soldiers that are very emotionally intelligent or feel a lot of empathy, because that just really isn't good for stabbing people, basically. And I know there are or there probably still are, but there definitely have been practices of really desensitizing people very systematically to their emotional sense, to their sense of empathy, to their hearts, and just hardening people, and that is what hard people, that's I think that's really what it comes from, is a hardness of heart, a sense of feeling like you're totally in control, and you just aren't swayed by these emotional senses. And I was just thinking that trauma, definitely, I would say that generational trauma that has been passed from generation to generation is very plausible. Like I think we really underestimate how prevalent that is. The other day I was on this retreat over the last week, and I think it was a poem that someone read, which was about the First World War, and someone asked, how many people here had a relative that died in the First World War, or the Second World War, and like more than half the people put up their hands. And then it was like, people saying, yeah, my father or my grandfather was completely traumatized by it, couldn't function, and like how that would then affect your own conditioning, like how emotionally available like one of your caregivers is, and how willing they are to be vulnerable, and how, because the importance of closeness and care and tenderness is just so important, for one's conditioning, and how something like the hardening of the heart, the deliberate hardening of the heart through warfare could just be passed down, and seep into our, the makeup of our culture.
Yeah, no, I think that those generational things have a huge impact on societies, and that's another thing from the book on human nature by Robert Greene that he talks about, is these kind of generational cycles, and fits in with the saying that the nations are born stoic and die Epicurean, which is, the Stoics were very much about logic and rationality a lot of the time, at least from my understanding of it, and very much like do what is necessary. You will put off your own pleasure if that's necessary for your principles to be upheld. And that is, how often people are in a war generation. They have to have that kind of mentality because they're sacrificing potentially themselves in order to give life to future generations. And often what seems to happen is that you get a generation like that, and slowly it ends up to the point where people get more and more out of touch with how they live in such an amazing world. There's plenty of stuff to complain about, but like the fact that you live in like a governed society where like you're pretty safe from crime in general, like it's unlikely that people are just going to completely just take all of your stuff and like kill you. It's very rare, and that you do have a lot of freedom to do what you like, express yourself how you like, live how you like. There's a massive degree of freedom, and that is something where you can just become out of touch with what that cost and how hard it was to get to this stage. And through that kind of losing of touch, then the things that were done, those stoic principles can end up not being withheld, which means that the people aren't thinking long term, and that things are, crumble, or that another stoic nation takes advantage of the weakness of that nation, which is more just living for their own pleasure. So that's an example of how things can change throughout the generations. So it is like a very documented thing. Like these cycles do exist. You can't predict them exactly, but it's pretty reliable in different cultures as well, that these patterns exist, and how much your parents and grandparents influence, the whole psyche, the collective psyche, and I guess the zeitgeist of the generations that follow.
I guess with the examples you gave of, for example, in the war generation, then yeah, you just kind of have to bite the bullet, and you make sacrifices, and that's that, and that's just how it is, and I think that seems to be the case. It's definitely like the case for my grandparents. It's just like, and even when the war ended, it was just like they just want a simple life. They're not interested in anything too dramatic, or they don't want to be famous, they don't want to be rich, whatever. It's just they just want a straightforward existence after all that chaos. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like there was this, in a way, it's like it goes from that state of strength and clarity, and it gets a bit kind of flabby over time. I can see the cycle for sure, in that people obviously forget how horrific war actually is, so I hope I don't freak anyone out, but I think we're kind of overdue in a way at this point, with the generations that's gone by, of having another war, basically. Like it wouldn't shock me that much if that was going to happen, because it's been long enough that we have no experience of it. Basically, we have like 2 generations back who may or may not have been kind of traumatized by it. We've got our own parents that will have had the brunt of that, and then it kind of goes off into something else, to the point now where it's quite alien to us, the idea of being in war and having to make those sacrifices. So that's one example. But also, it gets a little bit more complicated when you look at societies that are very deprived, and warfare and revolutions and stuff often come from very deprived places as well, where things are really not comfortable at all, where you might imagine that there would have to be this kind of, all right, well, we just got to do what we've got to do kind of thing. And yet the emotional side of things, and the othering and the fearfulness and the past traumas and stuff are all in there as well. So then wars often, there seems to be an onward cycle of war in a lot of places that are very deprived. So I guess it gets a little bit more complicated there as to how that might look. But this is I need to come back to to the heart.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I really took from this quote was that it is really important to listen to those emotions, not to discount them, because there can be so much wisdom in them. But once you have the emotion that kind of notifies you, like I said, if you meet someone and you get a funny feeling about them, pay attention to that emotion. It's not necessarily right. They might just look similar or have a similar way of talking to someone who like bullied you at school. And this person who's in front of you right now might actually just be a really nice person. And there's something about them that seems similar to something that was traumatic in your past. And that's causing you to have an emotional reaction, a negative emotional reaction to them. So I think it's really important to listen to that emotion, but also to filter that with some logic, or at least to think like, is this likely to be correct? In the example of a speech, thinking like, okay, let me just analyze this from a logical point. I'm feeling very emotional about this, but maybe I need to break this down logically. And I think that it's really important to have that interplay between the two. I think that dialogue that often happens completely unconsciously. Normally, your logic and emotion will just kind of like, it will just naturally happen without you consciously doing anything, and you'll come to a decision, and it can just happen naturally. But sometimes you will need to maybe, take the reins a little bit and really pay attention to that emotion rather than just pushing it down. And, also once you pay attention to that emotion, thinking about it, like, does this really make sense to feel this? Like, is this helping me or hurting me? And yeah, I think that's just so valuable to learn to combine the two and to listen to both of them and get good at knowing which things that your logical mind is best suited to. What things does it do well? And you might notice that your emotional intelligence is actually better at certain things. And just through shedding this awareness on it, you're going to build a better awareness of which is best in which scenario.
Yeah, that is a training, I think, is the best way of putting it, really. I think it's a training. Like, again, I've only got my own experience, but it's hard. I find it hard, it's like it's actually familiarizing yourself with familiarizing myself with my own emotions and what's going on in my body is hard work, because there's such a desire for certain feelings to not be there. It's like, and I just want to get rid of them, and I want to just ignore them, or I want to distract myself from them, all of these things. And it requires actually sitting, and that's why something like meditation is so important, I think, is an ability to actually just sit with what is going on, to sit with and become familiar with emotions, what they feel like. What does it feel like to have a heart? What does it feel like to feel open-hearted or closed-hearted? Or, what does that feel like in the body? And I think we've maybe leaned a little bit on the side of negative feelings here, but, it's like the plethora of all emotions. It's just, it's an amazing landscape, actually, and that's something that I've learned over a few years of practicing, is that it's fascinating, what these things fit like, noticing, when someone says something, and you'll notice your heart respond or tighten up or open, and I might start a conversation feeling quite closed, and then it will sort of melt into something else, or it will shift in my body a bit, and it's like a really interesting like thing that's going on, like this like kind of body lava lamp kind of thing of like blobbing up and down, and like it's really cool. And it, and and the fruits of it are not just being able to cope. It's not just being able to cope, but it's like, for me, I want to live a life where I can be open-hearted, where I can feel real connection with people. Means there has to be vulnerability there. There has to be a sense of open-heartedness, of feeling like the blockers and barriers can be moved out the way, and that there's just this clear transparency and openness. And that is, any time that you felt really at ease and free and joyous around people, there is open-heartedness there. That's why it's your body responding. Well, it's your mind and body in sync, but responding to, I can be open here, I can be at ease here, and that's not possible if there's close-heartedness, if there's this sense of needing to protect yourself, which is just, again, it's just my experience, but that can come in, very easily can come into a place where I have a protective shell around me a lot of the time. And it means I can't connect with people properly. It means that I can never really feel at ease with people because I'm holding back. I'm saying, I cannot be sure that I'm safe here, and that's so limiting. It's not, you can get along, it's fine. You can live life like that. It's not like you're really suffering, but you're not feeling things deeply, or like feeling the fullness of life with that shell there. It's not really possible. So that's what's at stake, and that's what's on offer. Is real deep joy and connection with people. That's what's possible in this area, I think.
Well, that's a beautiful place to move on to the quote for next week, I think. So the quote for next week is from Alan Watts. We've not had one from him for a while, and I think that was actually our first one. Our first episode was the first published episode, I think, was the Alan Watts one.
Yep.
So this one goes, Zen does not confuse spirituality with thinking about God while one is peeling potatoes. Zen spirituality is just to peel the potatoes. So if you got any thoughts about that or the quote that we've just done, then we'd love to hear from you guys. We really, it's always awesome to hear from people who are listening to the show. And you can send it to knowwhatimean.podcast on Instagram, or at the email in the podcast description. And if you enjoyed this, please share this with someone who you think will also enjoy this conversation. We're growing organically, so we really appreciate it when people share it, and that we can reach more people with these conversations. So if you think it's something that you'd like more people to hear, then we appreciate you doing your bit and helping to spread it. So with that, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Peace.